here today. So, in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges in a changing and very unstable geopolitical landscape, can the European Union hold its own? Or is it destined to bring up the rear in the global race for power and influence? I'm delighted to welcome for our first discussion on will Europe deliver on its ambition? First, our keynote speaker, I'm going to have a chat with him and then I'll introduce our other panelists later on. Clément Beaune, it is great to have you with us. He is, of course, French Minister of State for European Affairs. Thank you so much for finding the time, Minister, to be with us this afternoon. And let us dive straight in. The title of this session is Will Europe Deliver on Its Ambitions? And in that context, we talk a lot about building back better, building forward better. What does that really mean? How do you see the challenge ahead as we hopefully begin to emerge from the COVID pandemic?
Thank you very much for your invitation, and thank you very much for your flexibility and the flexibility of the panelists as well. I will talk with later on because I know you had to, because of me, to reorganize and to reschedule a bit. So thank you very much for this. I appreciate this opportunity to discuss. Well, the question is very broad, and of course, it will take time to implement and identify even the challenges we have to face in this building back phase. I just wanted not to avoid the question or to be too long on the past, but to say a few words about how we dealt with the crisis, because of course it's a starting point of this building back. From a European perspective, an EU perspective, I think we have seen during the crisis better and more than in previous crises. I think of the financial crisis 10 years before, for instance, that we were able to react quickly, ambitiously, and to avoid the trap of the too little, too late syndrome at the European level, which was a bit our problem, or quite a lot our problem during the Greek crisis or the sovereign debt crisis in the previous decade. I don't want to be too long because everyone knows the different phases of the pandemic and the response we brought. But when you take the economic side, with a lot of pragmatism and flexibility, suspending some fiscal rules, suspending competition rules, acting together and with a common fiscal plan, recovery plan as soon as July 2020, I think the EU has already delivered on this. We have a lot of issues now in the implementation moment and so on, but I think it's quite strong. It was unexpected, and we demonstrated we have been able in difficult times to overcome our taboos, our difficulties, common debt, for instance, and it was, I think, quite impressive and quite important. It's the same, actually, maybe a bit less commented and less known on the health side of the pandemic directly, because what we have done at the European level is to develop a common framework, to set it up, to carry it out, the vaccine purchase. And this was in an area in which there was pretty much zero competency from the EU and zero budget and zero legal tool at the very beginning of the pandemic. And we made this choice. It was difficult, it was criticized, but I think it was a winning choice. Now we have a phasing out moment of the crisis. It's not over, of course, but we can think of the way we can build back. I think we should have the same approach. Try to redefine our priorities, to overcome some taboos. For instance, we know that beyond the recovery plan, we will have to invest a lot in the green transition, in the digital transition. It was quite interesting to hear Angela Merkel a few weeks ago, so at the very end of her final mandate, saying, I think in these words exactly, we will need huge amounts of money to invest in the coming years. So I think this is quite well recognized. This is a clear European change in our approach. Does not mean, I don't want to sound too French from the very beginning, that we will not need fiscal rules. I think we definitely need them, that we need to kill all the framework and the rules we have now. I think it's not reasonable and not true, but we will have to change the paradigm in a way. I think it will be the same in a lot of areas for security, for defense, for trade policy. We need a lot of areas to reset in a way in the coming years. I don't want to be too long because I see, Jacki, that you are
I have lots of questions for you.
but having a lot of questions. So it was just a first comment, but
Absolutely. On your point about overcoming taboos, and as you say, we'll need to go on doing that to meet these very big challenges. Are you confident that we still have a political climate, a mood around the EU table that will enable us to go on doing that? And in terms of moving forward, what do you hope can be achieved specifically in the 6 months of your presidency? It's not long, it'll be upon us soon. Where concretely do you think you can really make a difference?
Well, you're right. That was why I was mentioning the crisis moment and the crisis mood. It's more difficult. It's a traditional European issue or approach to speed up or to be up to speed in normal times, in more normal times, I would say, because in crisis periods we overcome our difficulties, our processes very long and so on. So we have to keep this mood of urgency, even if it's not so obvious now. But when we see energy prices, when we see the international context, it's clear that we have to do something differently. During the French presidency, we would like to use this approach of a kind of European model, of a new European model. We have to consolidate, to adapt. I think it's true for climate. We have a lot of tools on the table to be discussed. I think, for instance, the carbon border adjustment mechanism would be very important to change the approach in the European Union on climate and trade. I think that in the digital world, having an agreement on the DSA and the DMA, these famous pieces of legislation which are discussed at the European level, would be very important as well. Not, of course, to say we regulate the success of others, but to say we regulate in a European way this big transformation of our lives. Same in the social area, to take another example, which I think is very much at the core of the European model, to have, for instance, an agreement or a compromise on the minimum wage directive. I take these concrete examples, climate, digital, and social, and concrete examples within these topics of pieces of legislation, because these are priorities we would like to push forward during the French presidency, to find landing zone, to find compromises on. I think that would be very important. Of course, as you do know, 6 months, I don't even mention the fact we have elections, but 6 months is a short period of time. That's why I always insist on this way to present things, which is French presidency will not start on January the 1st, but has started on September 26, 2017, when President Macron delivered the speech of La Sorbonne. Not to say that Europe is under French presidency from 4 years, not at all, but to say that if you want to have results, you first need to invest in the debates of idea, in the intellectual debates, make proposals, not only have a vision, but make concrete proposals and fight for this during a longer period of time than 6 months, obviously. If we want, for instance, to have a result on DSA, DMA, it's also because collectively we have worked on this before.
Absolutely. I wanted to ask you, we'll come back on some of these issues when I bring our panel in, but I wanted to just ask you, as we look to these challenges, there's been a lot of discussion, and we had a strategic council meeting this morning with lots of people who've been around the EU negotiating table, discussion table for a long time. And the concern was that we're becoming crisis management predominant, that it's all very reactive, that we're not so good at anticipating what is coming. Do you believe we can break out of this cycle of reactivity to these immense challenges that we face and really begin to deliver a more hopeful vision? Or do you think the nature of the challenges we face mean we are doomed, if you like, to be in reactive mode for the foreseeable future? How do we change that paradigm?
No, I don't think so. And I think using the opportunity of the Council presidency we will have next semester, but far beyond, we need also a narrative of pride in a way in the European model. I was mentioning the crisis at the beginning, not to give a pessimistic speech this afternoon, but to say that we should be proud, for instance, of all I mentioned, of the fact that at the European level, of course, it was reactive, but we were able to defend a model, which I think is deeply EU or European solidarity, democratic functioning maintained during this crisis, a lot of solidarity within the club of the EU, but also abroad, international solidarity. We are the biggest exporter of vaccines at the moment as EU. So I think all this, sometimes we don't even recognize the merits of what we have been doing. And this is quite European, probably from a cultural point of view, but quite specific to the EU as a political project, which is a bit specific. It's not a state, it's not a nation state, it's not even a federation, I think. It's something, as we know, and it's been highly debated, which is, as we say, sui generis. It's ad hoc, and it's very difficult to develop a narrative, but we should. And I think during the presidency, we will also try to inject some fresh ideas on what we should do for the younger generation, what we should do for our values, what we should do for European culture and heritage, for instance. I think on all this, we can do a lot more to have a kind of forward-looking narrative, positive narrative. And I just take one example, not to be too long. When you have an American president or a Chinese leader saying on TV or to the world, we will be the first country to send people to planet Mars in a few years, everyone claps and is very impressed. If the president of the European Commission would say that in the European Parliament, everybody would laugh, because we don't dare as Europeans to have common, very ambitious projects.
Absolutely. So we need to dare. And I want to talk about those fresh ideas, the way forward. And I don't want to dwell on it, but I cannot, having you here today, headlines this morning. I hate talking about EU-UK relations. I prefer to focus on the future and the delivery on the ambitions. But one question, a comment, if you would, to the latest development. You announced last night some retaliatory measures, new controls on UK fishing boats and on trucks, and a threat. You said you would review. You did not exclude reviewing the energy supply to the UK. 2 words on why you've done that and where it takes us, and then we will leave that topic and turn back to the future.
Well, to be very frank, I'm not happy about these measures. I think they needed to be taken. They are not coming out of the blue. We have been discussing, and I wish we can discuss further with the British government, the British authorities for 10 months on this specific issue of fisheries. But I think we have to be clear. The feeling in the EU, to be very frank, across the EU, is now that the Brexit page has been turned. It was painful, it was difficult, we negotiated, we were all sad about this departure. We defended in common our interest with a common mandate, common negotiator for 4 years. We reached an agreement, but I must say that unfortunately some important elements of this agreement are not complied with by the British government. We see what happens in Northern Ireland with the protocol of the discussions we have. We see what happened with fisheries. So it's not only about fisheries, and it's not only about France. It's to say, if we want to trust each other, if we want to build the future together, which we will need to do, of course, we need to be two, and we need to have reasonable trust in the fact that the word given will be respected. And it's not the case now. We have to defend a very clear, specific interest, fisheries, because it's important, and there's no reason why we should sacrifice it. So we take these measures, temporary, reversible. They can go either way. Either we increase if the situation deteriorates, or we withdraw if the situation improves. It's as simple as that, and we want to keep up the dialogue, but to be also very clear, the EU, I think it's true for friends, for neighbors. It's also true, even more true for opponents in some cases. We need to state our interests and to defend them.
Thank you very much indeed. And I would ask our audience, I know we have a lot of journalists watching. I say we don't have much time in this session. We have a lot of ground to cover. And I think you gave a very comprehensive reply there. So let us move on from that. Let me bring in our discussants in this session. I'm delighted to welcome Danuta Hübner, MEP, member of the European Parliament's Committees on International Trade and on Economic and Monetary Affairs, and of course, a former European Commissioner, and Daniela Schwarzer, Executive Director for Europe and Eurasia at the Open Society Foundations. A very warm welcome to you both. You've been listening to what the Minister had to say, and I just wanted to go back to that central question about what does building forward better mean? And if the EU is to deliver on its ambitions that we were hearing about from the Minister, what are the key challenges? Danuta Hübner. You're muted at the moment. Sorry. The immortal words of COVID times.
You know, I think I'm in the hands of experts, and then they put my video, so I hope they will unmute me as well. But thank you, Jacki, and it's also good to see you, and it's also good to know that there are annual meetings of the European Policy Center. That's really a perfect news for all of us. You know, the answer to this question, whether we can just do things better, whether we have to do things to move forward and do things better and think of a better future, we have no other choice and there's no other option. And I think Europe works when the decision is made, there is no other option. We have to deliver. So I think it was also good to listen to Minister, because I also hope that from French Presidency we will just get more appetite for more Europe, and this is something which I count very much. And I think not only me. I also think that a good test for Europe was the way we entered the whole pandemic. There was a small hiccup, but actually we have shown as Europe just capacity to mobilize, to survive, and we also these taboos, just suspending or getting rid of taboos. This doesn't happen often, so I think this is extremely important. We just have to stick to it. And I also think that what is extremely important is that not everything is perfect, because we still have all those vetoes hanging over our heads, and we have this unanimity culture. Even if you don't have to vote and you don't have to have the same opinion, you just try to build always this consensus. So this track of coordination of national policies that the Special European Council has sort of started to propose and to follow, I think it's a kind of, I don't like it, frankly. I don't think we have good experience with this coordination of national resources, national policies when moving forward. We need everybody to do what it takes nationally, but I think we really need, in addition to coordination, first of all, we need something which we used to call community method. We have to get together, we have to stick together, we have to get rid of threats to democracy, we have to really get rid of lack of resiliency of democratic institutions. This is, I think, extremely important.
Absolutely, and that raises the key question. And Daniela, come to you and then back to the Minister about, we have the ambitions, we know what we need to do, but do we have the tools that we need to do it? But Daniela, first in terms of the challenge and how you see it, and this narrative of pride, I was very struck by what the Minister said about changing the mood music, if you like, about the EU and what it can do.
Well, thank you for having me, and it's a pleasure to be on this panel together with Clément and Danuta. I think what became very clear in Clément Beaune's words was this double challenge of real geopolitical, very important shifts that Europe lives through, and then crisis momentum, which we have at the moment. And he mentioned the energy crisis, which is really the topic of the day, but it goes back to important structural issues that Europe has to face. And I think it is extremely important, yes, to keep up a narrative on Europe, which is forward-leaning. But we have to realize that over the past years, some of the issues we are now grappling with, they were anticipated and they were even acknowledged on the political level. But we have to be very honest with ourselves. We haven't put in place all the measures, all the necessary coordination that we should have. Just look at energy policy, which is, for instance, between Germany and other European partners, not really coordinated. We are now facing a situation where we have accumulation of crisis momentum, but also of structural shifts. And in order to tackle this, we have to be politically extremely ambitious, and that does not work without a forward-leaning and very strong European narrative. And I think we have all reasons to be proud of what we have achieved in Europe, and the fact that this is being challenged from the outside, in my view, is by far no reason to give up on any of the principles that we have enshrined in the way the EU works and in our fundamental EU treaties, but rather to be now sort of awake and ready to defend them and to make the EU stronger. And this has as much an internal dimension as it has an international one.
Thank you. And I want to come back on that point a little later. But to your point about we have not put in place all the measures, we anticipated the problems, we didn't act. Minister, in terms of, you said earlier, we did so much better. We avoided the traps of the Euro crisis. So we did learn about the importance of reacting quickly and so on. But do you believe that the EU has the tools it needs now to meet all those challenges you outlined in our conversation at the start? Or how can we strengthen its capacity to act?
Well, my feeling is the tools, in terms of legal tools, we have them in most cases. I think that there are some elements of institutional change that would be needed. The way we elect the European Parliament, the size of the Commission, but I don't think it's the key issue is the tools we would lack. We just saw during the crisis that we mentioned at the beginning that, for instance, even in the health area, in which, as we said, there was no competency as such for the EU, we managed, not in all areas, but in the key area of vaccination, to set up a common framework, to purchase our vaccine together, to give this role of coordination to the European Commission. So, of course, it was easier because there was this emergency, this sense of emergency during the crisis. But when we want, we can do it. So I think it's much more a matter of political will. And what, as we know in Europe, can lack is that when we don't see that there's an immediate need for action, we tend to procrastinate and to postpone decisions and to go back to our normal processes, which are very long. It's in average 2 years to have any legislation adopted in the EU. This is very different from what we see at the national level, for instance, even outside the crisis moments. So if we want, for instance, to have an agreement and some key elements of the green transition, this carbon border adjustment mechanism, the Fit for 55 package, I mean, it would be a big change to have an agreement on this, and we can do it without changing the treaties or making a big change in the way we decide. Just a matter of keeping this pace of political momentum, this political decision that we need.
So you don't fear that we may raise expectations? I mean, you talk there about the tendency when there isn't a crisis to procrastinate, but that because some of the levers are at national level, and I'm thinking, let's take energy prices, taxation, subsidies for people hit hardest, for example, the levers are at national level, that where the EU doesn't have the levers, it risks raising expectations amongst the public that it can't deliver on because it doesn't have the tools. You're not concerned that the public may look to Europe and then be disappointed? Same question to the Minister and then to both of you. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. No, my concern is much more than we'd lack the political will to do so. Yeah. I think there are expectations. I'm very surprised positively to see, for instance, I think it's true in France, it's probably true in many member states, that even anti-European political parties, far-right parties, for instance, now expect things and say it publicly from the EU during the crisis. They were never criticizing the EU for what it was doing, but for what it was not doing in coordinating border measures and so on. It's quite interesting to see that even for these political forces, the narrative has changed a lot. So my fear is that we don't deliver because we lack this sense of emergency, this political will, rather than because the EU cannot do it from a legal point of view. I don't think it's so true in most, regarding most challenges, migration, climate, trade, and so on. I think we have a lot of tools. Question is, do we use them? Do we have the energy to use them beyond the COVID crisis and beyond any crisis?
And perhaps come back on how we inject that political will into the process a bit later. But Daniela, from your perspective, do you agree with the Minister? We fundamentally, he says, have the tools. We can do it. The issue is political will.
On many accounts, I agree. I think there are some areas where we still need more tools, and we have to be quite honest with ourselves. And that is, if I look at economic developments in the EU and in particular at the Eurozone, it is clear that we have identified the need to complete the monetary union. And here we haven't put in place everything, in my view, that we need to make the Eurozone more crisis resilient for the future. But on the issues that the Minister mentioned, migration, we have the tools. We cannot pass the necessary legislation, or even if we have, with the package that was agreed as a response to the migration crisis of 2015, we saw that it was simply not implemented. So here, very clearly a question of political will. On climate now, we have a huge financial instrument. And I think this is really one of the big achievements. And I think it's not only sort of an achievement in terms of devising an ambitious instrument to support climate transition in the situation of an economic crisis following COVID-19, but the mere fact that the 27 member states were actually able to agree on this in those very difficult conditions of video conferencing and of actually having just gone through a phase of really nationalized crisis management, I think that is a political achievement that actually we should bear in mind, because it's a very positive achievement of the year 2020. And so when we later come to the question of political will, I really think we should discuss what made us move, or what made you governments move then. What made that possible? Because in some countries, what was created, and I'm speaking to you as someone who lives and works in Berlin, that was a very substantive step of putting in place an enormous instrument, which I think 2 or 3 years earlier, if someone had said we're going to do this, no one would have quite believed that this would have cost.
Indeed. Danuta, a thought on this?
Yes, I think, first of all, we have more tools than we just mentioned. Of course, the whole new generation of EU and the way we are combining the plans, national plans for development and for growth and recovery and resilience. Then the way we combine this with the European semester, when we coordinate policies where there's no teeth actually, and now there will be teeth also, because it's just extremely important to see the European semester combined with this recovery and resilience fund and the plan and fund and the way it is used. We have here, I think, huge potential for efficiency improvement and also for discipline that we need so much. But we don't mention trade so far. I think trade is extremely important also, because we know that 35 million jobs in Europe depend on exports. So, and we are doing a lot now to become more assertive, to become more competitive. We are looking also into the relations with US, as you know, where there is also a huge potential for working more quickly, I would say, on many issues related to competitiveness. So that's also important. But then investment, the minister mentioned at the beginning, I think investment, it's not only public investment where we have this taboo or this old paradigm is just moving or being shaken a bit, and we see more public funding also coming to the economy, but we also are doing a lot to create conditions, better environment for private investment, and this requires changes in the financial sector and the banking sector and the building of capital markets union, where unfortunately we are dragging our feet. So this is also important. And then politically, I think, as you know, politicians have fear only of voters. So the Conference on the Future of Europe, which is bringing citizens into this discussion, is also bringing not only new vision and understanding that we are in a crucial moment of European history, but also brings new views and also new controllers of the accountability. So I think we are also having this political instrument.
Thank you very much. And 2 words, if you would, Minister, on how you see the role on the Conference of the Future of Europe. We had the first plenary bringing the citizens together with the member states, everybody discussing these issues together. Do you think it can make a real difference, both in terms of, you've indicated we have most of the tools we need, can it make a difference to the political will discussion? Can it put some fire in the belly, if I could put it that way, of politicians who may be hesitating about delivering on what the public wants? Minister.
Sorry, I didn't get that.
I was asking about the Conference on the Future of Europe and whether you believe, Danuta Hübner was just talking there about the role of the conference and how important this might be, not so much you say in terms of tools, because you say we have them, but I'm wondering if it can help with the political will, with giving politicians the signal, this is what the public wants, this is what they expect, you need to deliver.
Yes, of course, the idea of this conference is to give a kind of trigger or driver to change and to reforms beyond the crisis. The idea was there before the COVID even started, because we suggested that on the French side in 2019, and the idea was taken over by Ursula von der Leyen, which is good. And now I think it's quite relevant after the crisis to try to give this momentum again. The idea is, I mean, it's a gamble in a way, to be very frank, because we hope that it will give this energy, this clarity about what citizens, what contributions lead to in terms of change, reforms, political will. For instance, we had this exercise already in France in regional panels and a national panel. It was very interesting to see that the three main areas which come up as priorities for action and reform is climate, no big surprise, defense and security. Maybe it's a French perspective, but I think it's interesting that it comes so high for European action, and industry and innovation. But if we have, I mean, then we need, of course, more concrete proposals. But if we see that, for instance, there is a lot of emphasis on values and rule of law, on climate change and so on, I think it will give, again, this momentum and this sense that we need urgent action and ambitious action. And then when we go to the details of the contribution of the conference, I think we will see a lot of interesting ideas. But the key idea is to have this pressure from the contributors, from citizens, from national parliaments and so on, to say, okay, you need to keep this process of changing things at the European level. You did it during the crisis because you had no choice. Now we need it on a more sustainable and permanent basis in a way.
Thank you. I want to come back to the rule of law. And Daniela, the minister there describing the conference as a gamble, in a sense, which may deliver this message from the public for urgent and ambitious action. Big question in some people's minds, will the politicians respond to that? Will it deliver? Will the gamble come off? How do you see that? And you have to leave us in a couple of minutes, I know. So on the rule of law issue, I mean, we are talking here about political will. We're talking about the EU having to come together to face these challenges. And because of the rule of law debate, we are seeing deepening divisions, deepening tensions between member states. How do you see the way forward there? And then, Minister, I'll give you a chance to talk about the rule of law issue as well. Daniela. I'm linking the two things. I'm linking Conference on the Future of Europe with rule of law, because we've already seen from citizens that this is one of the issues they really want to talk about, as the minister mentioned.
And I think that is of crucial importance to broaden this debate. The Conference on the Future of Europe definitely is a superb occasion, but I also feel we have to have this debate in national contexts as well. And I can just speak about an experience which I made last weekend, because I was on a German TV show with a call-in option for citizens, and it was on the rule of law in the case of Poland. And I was struck by the intensity of the debate on social media and the questions that came in by citizens who spontaneously called. And what I found very encouraging was the very strong commitment that I saw on social media, that this is a key defining identity of the European Union and that it needs to be protected. But then there was also a quite interesting debate on how far can Europe reach and what is legitimate in terms of national sovereignty. And that's, of course, the other debate which we need to have. I think linking the two, the way the Polish government does it at the moment, is not legitimate because it puts into question fundamental questions of the EU as principles, which Poland actually signed up to. But the question of sovereignty is a crucial one. However, always, if one is an EU member, with respect to the fundamental principles that the EU has agreed upon and every single member state has signed.
Thank you.
And I think the final point that I wish to raise, and because you asked about the way forward, I think we have to have a very honest discussion what happens if a member state does not respect rule of law and the division of power in a democracy anymore in a clear way. Now, we all know we have no option to kick out a country, and that is definitely not a solution that I would argue for. But I think we have to be very honest and very realistic about the fact that simply some of the EU policies can then no longer apply to a member state that violates those principles. The discussion, and that will be very interesting to hear the minister's view on the financial instruments which now have their conditionality with regards to rule of law, but also the fact that, for instance, the European arrest warrant can no longer be applied, at least from the perspective of the Netherlands. So here, I think we have to be, it's not about kicking out a country, but it's about assessing the costs of no longer respecting the rule of law, both for the EU and the country itself.
Thank you, Daniela. And I know you have to leave us, so thank you so much. I would like, Minister, with your agreement, to go to Danuta first, because this is the country she knows best. So I'd be interested to get her perspective on where we are now and where we need to go, and whether, Danuta, it is often portrayed now as that the debate at the European Council was dialogue versus confrontation. One camp saying we must continue talking, one camp saying up with this we will not put, to use a very English expression. How do you see where we are now? And then I'll come to you, Minister. I'm going to take one question from the floor, and then I want to ask you all a final question.
Jackie, I'm not sure I know this country best anymore because I cannot understand, and that's probably the shortest answer. It's very difficult. Indeed, we see threats to democracy not only in the European Union. We see a lot of politicians that produce trouble across the world, and also we have it in our home. And the problem is that why they disregard the rules once they are in power. And I also think that power in the European Union, especially in European Council, that just has created after Lisbon Treaty a completely different territory for its own role in the European Union. The power left with national leaders is always, if I can say, has limits, because they come and go, they win and lose the elections. They are short-term thinking. They have always national interests because there are elections ahead of us, and the blame game is not coming from different spectrum of society, but from the politicians. So I think that EU policy cannot be seen as a sum of national policies, and we cannot adjust the EU as a community of law to the national interest or the policies that we apply, because these are values that go horizontally across the whole foundation of the European Union, and we just have to stick to it, because that's the only reason why we exist as the European coordination. So European integration. So I think we cannot just think that we can find a way, we can find a compromise. You cannot just trade values for withdrawing veto. This is something which is not, I think, the way to go. We have to wait for the voters in Poland to help Europe.
Thank you very much, Minister. You've been pretty clear on your views of this issue, but this characterization of it as it's either dialogue or it's confrontation. How do you see the way forward now? How can we find a way to solve this? And begin also, and what do you see as the consequences for other areas of EU business if we can't?
It's a very difficult issue, as Danuta said, because I think we need to be, I have no doubt on the fact we need to be strong on these principles, not because it's a way to fight a country or society. I think we should be very clear that it's not. Actually, I think that by protecting these values, we are protecting everyone, including and starting with people in Poland. But so first, it should be explained this way. I think it's not the kind of crazy idea of some people in Brussels or Luxembourg or Paris. It's about the common rules and the political project we have decided together. It's not just words. I think it's a key issue to make sure that our project just works. As Daniela said, if you start to say we don't have trust in the legal instruments and the legal system of all other member states, we cannot just work together, because any common rule decided would be fragilized and probably killed at some point in 1 month, 2 months, 2 years. So it's vital, literally, for the project. So we cannot be weak, or we cannot avoid this topic. That said, I think, as I explained, we should be very clear. It's not against one country. It's not against one people or society. And we have also to keep with this pressure, with these tools, including legal tools and financial tools, to keep open the dialogue. It's not very easy, but it's a balance we should always keep. And with Poland, I'm not sure we can find a common ground. I hope so. But what we are doing, for instance, I talk from the French perspective now, to be part of this, of the majority of countries insisting on rule of law, putting pressure on the rule of law implementation, but also offering this space for dialogue. President Macron discussed with Prime Minister Morawiecki before the European summit, received yesterday in Paris President Duda. I'm not saying it will give us a ready-made solution, but it demonstrates also that we are not turning our backs 100% to one country. But I think it's better to be tough and discussing, frankly, rather than being in between and not saying anything about the situation or implementing any procedure.
Absolutely. Let's squeeze in one quick question from George van Harak. I've unmuted you. If you unmute yourself, and please be brief, we don't have long. Georg, can you hear me? No, it would appear not.
Hey, sorry, this is actually Liz Bates. We're from Channel 4 News. Can you hear me?
I can, Liz.
It was Georg put the bid in on our behalf. I'm sorry to say it is because it's such an important issue. I'm going to take the opportunity to ask the Minister about the ongoing fishing row.
Okay, it's going to be a very quick one because, as I said, he has answered and it's not the focus of this panel, but a very quick one if you want.
The UK government has said this morning that they are in line with the rules as agreed under the Trade and Cooperation Agreement. What evidence does France have that the UK is in breach of those rules? And there's also been some speculation.
Okay, no, I'm going to stop you there. I'm sorry. We really don't have very long. And as I say, I don't want to spend too long. But Minister, I don't know whether you want to respond in terms of your evidence that they're not playing by the rules. It would be a very long answer, I know. But can we manage a short one?
It could be short. I mean, because we've been discussing for 10 months now. We have been responding to all the requests from the British administration on the evidence or the information we can provide regarding fisheries. The Commission, the European Commission, it's not a bilateral issue, has supported this statement and has helped us in the discussion to demonstrate and to give as much information as we can. And to be very frank, I think that after 10 months and a lot of technical discussion, if there are not a few licenses, but 45% of licenses missing for France, it's a political choice. So for us, it's clear that we are not in the framework of technical discussions and some lack of information anymore. After 1 month, we could say that. After 10 months and a lot of efforts on our side and the Commission side, I think it's not the situation.
Thank you very much. Minister, I want to come to you in a moment and try and identify a priority, but I'll ask Danuta first, and we do need to get you out on time. I know you have a meeting with the Prime Minister to go to, but Danuta, I'm going to be very unfair now and say of all the things we've talked about, so the French presidency slogan is recovery, power, strength. I don't know which way you prefer to translate puissance, belonging, recovery, power, belonging. For you, what is the most important priority? We've touched on a huge number of issues in the last 45 minutes. The most important priority to ensure that Europe really can build forward better, can stay in the global race by making sure that it is ready to deliver on its own ambitions. What for you is the most important of these issues? Same question to both of you.
Not of these, but I think for me, the most important thing for the French presidency is not to waste the potential coming from the people involved in building the future through the Conference on the Future of Europe. We count very much that the French presidency will really pick up the most important issues and will just use the citizens as those who are co-shaping the European Union, and that also the platform, which is an excellent instrument, evolving very slowly, that it will stay beyond French presidency, that we will all have this they will be smart enough to make this decision. So that would be, for me, extremely important. I also think that for France now to look belonging in the sense also of belonging to the global world with all the responsibilities to really maintain the multilateral nature of our relations, to understand that trade to be a win-win situation must be based on rules. We would very much appreciate that France takes this external geostrategic responsibility very seriously and work in this and make the member states ratify the free trade agreements which have not been ratified. It's just so this global thing plus citizens, I think I would like to see.
Thank you very much. And we haven't had time really to talk about the external dimension of the challenge, which is huge. We're going to come back to that later on in our second panel with the President of Slovenia. But Minister, you have the last word. I know it is impossible, but when you look at those 3 words in your slogan and you look to the priorities for your presidency, what do you hope to be able to say? What would be your key priority that at the end of the 6 months we can say, yes, we really did make progress in terms of delivery? What for you is most important?
I mentioned some texts and some concrete items, but definitely if I had to choose, one of these words you mentioned in French, appartenance, sense of belonging, we would probably say in English, I would choose this one because this is a long-term one. This is the one which makes sure that with values, education, mobility, common European experiences for young people, we can make sure that we stand together. Because it's not naive, I think it's the truth. When you have had a concrete European experience, Erasmus or something like that, which is very limited in terms of number of people still now, unfortunately, you understand better and you are not anti-European. You have different ways to be involved in European affairs or discussions, but I think it's key, it's very important. There's no political project, and the EU is a political project which is sustainable without a common sense of belonging. So if we, of course, in 6 months, we will not solve this and create it, but if we can make progress in this direction, that would be the biggest achievement.
Thank you so much, Minister. And that is an issue I hope we will come back to this afternoon. We have a session later on with the EPC President, Herman Van Rompuy, and some analysts from the EPC talking about what young people hope for from Europe and how we deliver it. And I want to come back with them to that question of the sense of belonging. But Minister, I know you have a very hectic schedule. Thank you so much for juggling things around and finding a way to be with us this afternoon. Good luck for the presidency.
Thank you very much.
Hearing from you again. Danuta, thank you so much. Always lovely to have you with us and hear your insights and thoughts. Thank you both very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
For belonging, that's just absolutely, we support it.
Absolutely. It's all about belonging, as I say. We'll come back to that in our discussions later. So we're going to take a 15-minute break. Then we're coming back, goodbye, Minister, to a session where our question is, can Europe thrive in a world of transitions? And for that, we are going to be delighted to welcome the President of the Republic of Slovenia, who will be in conversation with two EPC analysts. So 15 minutes break. I suggest please don't log off or we have to relog you all on. I suggest you merely mute yourself, and if you want, turn your camera off, and I'll see you back here at 3 o'clock sharp. Thank you all very much for now.